Imagine waking up in medieval London with a problem that cannot wait. You are still lying beneath a rough wool blanket. The room is cold. The wooden shutters are closed. Somewhere downstairs, someone is already moving around. A horse makes a noise in the street. A baby begins crying in the neighboring room. And then you realize something. You need to use the toilet. Today, that would mean walking a few steps to a bathroom, perhaps turning on a light, opening a door, sitting down, flushing, and forgetting about it. But you are not living today. You are living in medieval London. There is no private bathroom waiting for you, no porcelain toilet, no flush, no sewer running quietly beneath your house. And depending on where you live, your toilet might be a dark wooden structure shared with your neighbors, or a cesspit beneath the floor, or a communal latrine, or in the worst circumstances, something much closer to the street than you would ever want. And the strange part is that medieval London did not simply ignore the problem. People had rules, people paid for cleaning, people complained. Officials tried to control waste. Neighbors argued about overflowing cesspits. Landowners worried about smells. Workers were hired to remove waste. And yet the problem never truly disappeared, because medieval London was becoming a huge city without anything resembling modern sanitation. So tonight we're going to step into that world. We'll find out where ordinary Londoners actually went to the toilet, what happened inside wealthy homes, who emptied cesspits, why rivers and streets became polluted, what happened when neighbors fought over waste, and what it was really like to live in a city where your waste was never quite as far away as you wanted it to be. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into the stranger side of history, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Boring History for Sleep. Now settle in. Let the modern world disappear. And imagine that you had just opened your eyes in medieval London. The morning problem. It is early. The sun has not completely risen. The room around you is dim. Your sleeping space is small. Perhaps you share it with family members. Perhaps you are a servant sleeping somewhere near the household's working areas. Whatever your circumstances, one thing is certain. You need somewhere to go. You climb out of bed. The floor is cold beneath your feet. You pull on your clothing. And now comes the question, where is the toilet? If you were wealthy, your situation could be considerably better. Some medieval houses had private latrines. Certain wealthy households had arrangements that allowed waste to fall into a cesspit or another collection area. Some latrines were built into structures attached to buildings. Some were positioned so waste could be collected below. The details varied enormously, but even the richest household could not simply make waste disappear. Eventually, someone had to deal with it, and that someone was often a worker whose job you would probably not want. But if you are ordinary, your choices are more limited. You may need to share. And sharing a toilet in medieval London could mean sharing much more than the toilet itself. You could be sharing the smell, the mud, the insects, the noise, and occasionally the arguments. The latrine. You leave your room, you walk through the house. Outside, the morning air is cold. The street is beginning to wake. You make your way toward the latrine. It is not beautiful. Nobody has decorated it with flowers. Nobody has installed soft lighting. It is functional. That is all. The structure may be made from wood. The floor may be rough. The opening beneath it leads toward a cesspit or another waste collection area. You are careful where you step. You have no reason to linger. And you quickly discover something important. The toilet itself is not necessarily the biggest problem. The real problem is what happens afterward, because waste has to go somewhere, and that somewhere has a limit. The cesspit. Beneath or near many medieval houses was a cesspit. Think of it as a collection chamber. Human waste and other household refuse could accumulate there. At first, perhaps it worked reasonably well. Waste disappeared below your feet. The surface looked normal, the street looked normal, the house looked normal. But underground, the pit was filling, and eventually it would need to be emptied. That sounds simple. It was not. Someone had to enter the business of removing accumulated waste from densely populated neighborhoods, and this created an entire sanitation economy. There were workers whose jobs involved cleaning and removing waste. They had to access pits. They had to remove the material. They had to transport it away. And they had to do this while living and working in a city full of narrow streets and crowded buildings. It was dirty work, dangerous work, and essential work. Without them, the city would become impossible to live in. We tend to imagine medieval London as if people simply threw waste into the street and forgot about it. The reality is more complicated. There were laws and regulations concerning cleanliness. People could be ordered to clean streets. Householders could be responsible for maintaining areas around their properties. Waste removal existed. There were workers who dealt with cesspits. There were people whose livelihoods depended on unpleasant jobs. In other words, medieval people understood that waste was a problem. They just didn't possess the technology to solve it easily. Imagine trying to maintain sanitation in a city without modern sewage pipes. Every household becomes part of the system. Every street becomes part of the system. Every cesspit becomes part of the system. And every mistake can affect your neighbors. Which leads to one of the most interesting parts of medieval sanitation: the arguments. Imagine living in a narrow medieval house. The building next door is extremely close. The walls are shared. The yard is tiny. Your neighbor has a latrine. So do you. And underneath them are waste pits. Now imagine that one of those pits starts leaking. Suddenly, this is not just your neighbor's problem. It is yours. The smell crosses the boundary. Waste may contaminate nearby areas. The ground becomes unpleasant. Flies appear. People complain. And suddenly, something as ordinary as going to the toilet becomes a legal and social problem. Who is responsible? Who pays for cleaning? Who owns the pit? Who has the right to use it? Who has to repair it? And what happens if somebody refuses? Medieval London had lawyers, it had courts, it had property disputes, and sanitation could become part of those disputes. Imagine taking your neighbor to court because their cesspit is making your home unbearable. It sounds ridiculous from a modern perspective, but in medieval London it could be a serious matter. Now step outside again. The city is fully awake. You walk through a narrow lane. People are carrying baskets. Merchants are opening their shops. Animals move through the street. There is mud beneath your feet. Water runs along parts of the roadway. And then you notice something. The street is not clean. It could contain food waste, animal waste, mud, broken objects, household refuse, and, depending on the circumstances, human waste. But here we need to correct one popular image of medieval London. It was not necessarily true that every person simply opened their window and threw a bucket of waste onto the street whenever they wanted. People used containers. People used cesspits. There were public regulations. There were systems for waste removal. but enforcement was imperfect, and a crowded medieval city had a tremendous amount of waste. The result could still be filthy, especially when rain arrived. Imagine a heavy rainstorm. At first, the rain seems like good news. It washes the streets. But medieval London has a problem. There is no modern storm drain system carrying everything safely away. The water moves through streets and lanes, mud becomes deeper, animal waste gets mixed into the water, refuse moves downhill, open drains and channels can carry unpleasant material through neighborhoods, and now your clean shoes are no longer clean. You step carefully, you try to avoid puddles, you hold your clothing away from the mud. A cart passes, water splashes. You have just discovered another truth about medieval London. Rain does not necessarily make the city cleaner. Sometimes it simply moves the dirt somewhere else. Eventually, all this raises another question. Where does the waste go? And one answer is the water. London sits beside the River Thames. The river is enormously important. It provides transportation, it supports trade, it provides fish, it connects London to the wider world. It is part of everyday life, but it is also exposed to the waste produced by the city. That does not mean the medieval Thames was simply one enormous sewer. That would be an exaggeration. The river was too important and too large to be reduced to that. But urban pollution was real. Waste entered waterways through different routes: drainage, runoff, industrial activity, household refuse, and other forms of pollution. The river could be both a source of life and a place where London's waste eventually ended up. That contradiction would remain for centuries. Now imagine a completely different London. You enter a wealthy household. The house is larger, there is more space, there are more servants, there may be a private latrine. Perhaps it is positioned so waste can fall into a cesspit or be removed more easily. The experience is more private, more comfortable, but not modern. There is still no flush. There is still no underground municipal sewer carrying everything away. Someone still has to clean, someone still has to remove waste, and someone still has to pay. This is an important pattern in history. Money can buy comfort. It cannot completely eliminate the problems of the age. A wealthy medieval Londoner could buy better food, better clothing, a larger house, more privacy, better sanitation arrangements. But they still lived in the same city. They still depended on the same streets, the same river, the same workers, the same weather, and the same basic limitations of medieval technology. Now comes another question. What did medieval Londoners use when they went to the toilet? The answer was not one universal material. People used what was available. Different households and periods could have different practices: natural materials, cloth, plant material, other inexpensive materials. The wealthy could have greater access to reusable cloth or better arrangements. The poor had fewer choices. The important point is that medieval people did not have a standardized bathroom supply aisle. There was no toilet paper hanging neatly beside the toilet. There was no disposable sanitary system. Everything depended on local resources, and waste disposal was closely connected to daily household life. The nightmare of a full cesspit. Eventually, every cesspit has a problem. It fills. Imagine living beside one. At first, perhaps you don't notice. Then the smell becomes stronger. You mention it to your household. Someone says it should be cleaned. A few days pass. Nothing happens. Now the smell is worse. Your neighbor complains. The landlord becomes involved. Someone says the pit is not actually full, someone else says it is. An argument begins, and somewhere beneath the wooden floor, the city's waste is waiting. Eventually, a worker arrives. The job begins. It is unpleasant. The material must be removed. It has to be transported. The workers must navigate narrow streets, and somehow the waste must be taken somewhere where it can be deposited or used. The city depends on this cycle. Waste enters, waste accumulates, waste is removed. And then the process begins again. It is not elegant, but it is a system. There is another side to this. Not everyone in medieval London spent their days thinking about sanitation. For many people, the toilet was simply part of life. Just as we do not spend our mornings thinking about the engineering beneath our modern bathroom, medieval Londoners did not wake every morning and marvel at their cesspits. They had jobs, families, bills, meals, arguments, markets, religious duties, children, neighbors. They were living their lives. The sanitation system became noticeable when it failed, when the smell became too strong, when a drain became blocked, when a cesspit overflowed, when a neighbor dumped waste somewhere they shouldn't, when authorities issued another regulation. In other words, sanitation became interesting when it became a problem. And in a city as crowded as London, problems were inevitable. Now imagine looking beneath the medieval city. Above ground, there are houses, markets, churches, workshops, taverns, streets, people. Below them, there is another world. Cesspits, drains, waste, water, foundations, buried objects. Layers of dirt accumulated over generations. This hidden underground world is one reason archaeology can tell us so much about medieval life. What people threw away can survive. Seeds, bones, pottery, wood, tools, food remains, and sometimes evidence of sanitation. The things medieval people considered worthless can become incredibly valuable to historians. Because garbage remembers. A broken pot tells us what people used. An animal bone tells us what they ate. A cesspit can reveal what entered a household's waste system. The medieval city left behind clues, and centuries later, archaeologists can read them. So what was medieval London's toilet secret? It wasn't simply that medieval people were dirty. That is too easy. The real secret is that they were trying to solve a problem that had become much bigger than their technology could comfortably handle. London was growing. More people meant more food. More food meant more waste. More buildings meant more households. More households meant more cesspits. More cesspits meant more maintenance. And eventually, the entire city became a complicated machine for moving people, goods, water, and waste. Except the machine was built from wood, stone, mud, carts, labor, rules, and human effort. There was no button to press, no underground network quietly carrying everything away, no flush. Every stage depended on people. And when those people failed to keep up, everyone noticed. Night has arrived. You return home. The streets are darker now. The market has closed. The merchants have disappeared behind wooden shutters. The last customers have gone home. The stalls that were crowded only a few hours ago are now empty. The muddy streets remain. A few scraps of food lie forgotten near the walls. A broken piece of pottery sits in the darkness. A puddle reflects the weak glow of a nearby candle, and gradually the noise of medieval London begins to change. During the day, the city had been almost impossible to escape. Voices everywhere, carts rolling over uneven roads, horses stamping against the ground, merchants calling out their goods, children shouting, workers arguing, church bells marking the hours, doors opening and closing, people moving through the narrow streets. But now the city is becoming quieter, not silent. London rarely becomes truly silent. Somewhere a dog is still barking, somewhere else a baby is crying. A horse shifts its weight beside a stable, a drunk man laughs loudly in the distance, a cart moves slowly along the street, its wooden wheels creaking beneath the weight. And then even that sound begins to disappear. You climb the stairs toward your room. The wooden steps creak beneath your feet. You pause for a moment. You can hear someone moving behind a wall. Perhaps a neighbor is still awake. Perhaps someone is preparing food for tomorrow. Perhaps a mother is trying to settle a child who refuses to sleep. You continue upward. Your room is dark. There is only the faint glow of a candle. The flame moves slightly whenever a draft slips through the cracks in the wooden wall. You close the door. For the first time all day, you are alone, or at least as alone as a person can be in medieval London. There are people on the other side of the wall, people below you, people above you, people walking outside, people living their own lives only a few steps away. Privacy is not something you can completely take for granted. You remove your clothing, you place your belongings beside the bed. The room is cold, the blanket is heavy. The mattress is nothing like the soft mattress you might expect today. It is simple, practical, enough to sleep on. You lie down. For a few moments, you simply listen. The city is still there. The river continues flowing. The wind moves between the buildings. A shutter rattles somewhere outside. Footsteps pass beneath your window, then disappear. You close your eyes, and suddenly, you remember something. You will have to wake up tomorrow. There is work waiting. Food must be prepared, water must be carried, goods must be sold, animals must be fed, children must be watched, money must be earned. And eventually, sometime tomorrow, you will have to leave your bed and face the same streets again. The same mud, the same crowds, the same smells, the same neighbors, and inevitably the same toilet problem. You almost laugh at the thought because nobody in medieval London thinks of sanitation as history. To them, it is simply life. They do not know that centuries later people will look backward and become fascinated by their toilets. They do not know archaeologists will dig beneath the streets and discover the remains of their homes. They do not know that their discarded pottery, food remains, bones, and waste will eventually become evidence of how they lived. To them, a cesspit is not an archaeological discovery. It is just a cesspit, a bad smell, a maintenance problem, something that needs to be emptied, something that belongs to everyday life. And that is perhaps the strangest thing about history. The people we study never knew they were living in the past. They woke up believing that their world was simply normal. A medieval Londoner did not look at a wooden toilet and think, "Someday people will find this fascinating." They simply needed to use it. They did not walk through the muddy streets thinking, "Future historians will study these roads." They were simply trying not to fall into the mud. They did not hear the church bells and think about medieval culture. They heard a bell because that was how their world measured time. They did not smell the river and think about urban pollution. It was simply the river. They did not look at a crowded cesspit and imagine the future. They were worried about whether it needed cleaning. And beneath all the famous stories of medieval London, that ordinary reality is easy to forget. Kings, queens, wars, castles, cathedrals, merchants, knights. These are the things that usually survive in history books. But underneath those grand stories was another London, a London of ordinary people. People waking up before sunrise, people making breakfast, people carrying water, people repairing shoes, people cleaning floors, people buying bread, people arguing with neighbors, people worrying about money, people falling ill, people getting married, people raising children, people